I mix what I like, what I like.
I mix what I like is exactly where you want and need to be. I mix what I like, organic, vegan, soul food from your immediate diet. Live healthy.
I mix what I like, what I
We're
like.
here on I Mix What I Like. You may check us out on imixwhatilike.org, where you can see all these other shows and what my daddy likes and other cool things.
Peace, everybody. Good morning. Greetings. Welcome to I Mix What I Like. Again, I'm Jared Ball. Happy to be your host. Do all of the things, like, share, subscribe, support the Patreon. And let's continue with another week of 100 Years of Malcolm X. So as I was revisiting and preparing for this morning and looking back at some of the history and what is going to feature today, some of the backs and forth between Malcolm, Elijah Muhammad, and the Nation of Islam, I thought of the value in that and the value for today in that. And as much as I and we admire Malcolm and those attempting to do work like Malcolm, I think it was of value to revisit some of this and to see, for all of its flaws, we should relate to, for all of it and his flaws, to the extent any of us could identify any. I think that we should relate to the struggle as Malcolm did. That is, in this case, willing to be self-critical, willing to offer a balance or a reasonable amount of benefit of the doubt, a willingness to do research, to address directly people and the organization with which he was working and having trouble, attempts to resist cliques, and to perhaps be more mindful about running to enemy media. But again, as we've been wanting to highlight with this series, Malcolm was struggling with his advancing and evolving militancy and radical politics, his internationalism, his anti-capitalism, his Pan-Africanism, soda all day, solidarity of dispersed Africans. And these are ideas in politics that obviously are still of great value today. So in that regard, it's again always of value to revisit Malcolm and the work he was attempting. Let's go ahead and get started, and got a couple of clips, a couple of interviews. We're going to be checking out the interview I did last week with Baba Zak Kondo, updating his research on Malcolm X and his Conspiracies book. And despite some technical difficulties with his interview, which is why you'll see at some point it cuts to just audio, but we'll be discussing a little bit of Ibram Kendi's introduction and his forthcoming work. That is the introduction to Malcolm X Speaks, the reissue, and more. So let's go.
What happened between you and Malcolm X? What was the point of disagreement, sir?
The most of our disagreement was Malcolm wanted to use arms.
Use what?
He wanted to use arms, and I disagreed with him because we have always, for many years now, it's 34 years now, we never resorted to arms. And in fact about it, God reminded me of that time and again, never to pick up arms against no one.
Mr. Muhammad, I'm sorry. Would you say flatly that no black Muslims were involved in the shooting of Malcolm X?
I wasn't there, but I don't believe that any of my followers had nothing to do with it at all. Because we don't even know this person.
Who do you think might have done it then? Who would have had reason?
I don't know. I have no knowledge of that.
Are you in fear of your own life?
No, sir.
Do you expect to keep the date you have next Friday, the speaking engagement?
I most certainly does.
It's also interesting to go back and look at the Malcolm X FBI files compiled by Claiborne Carson, which I could not find in which I could not find some of what Peter Goldman claims in his new preface to the 2013 edition to his book, The Death and Life of Malcolm X, where he quotes, we'll look at it, but where he quotes the FBI files and Elijah Muhammad as calling for the assassination of Malcolm X. So I couldn't find that in here, and Goldman doesn't tell us where he was exactly quoting. So uh, if any of you can help me fill in that gap, please do. Maybe I've just missed it. But what I did find in here was the reconsideration by Malcolm and others that the NOI was not powerful enough to be doing everything to Malcolm. So he says here, he's quoted here on page 342, that is Malcolm. But, and this is from his autobiography, the more I keep thinking about this thing, the things that have been happening lately, I'm not all sure it's the Muslims. I know what they can do and what they can't. And they can't do some of the stuff recently going on. The more I keep thinking about what happened to me in France, I think I'm going to quit saying it's the Muslims. And on the next page, it also seems that from the moment of Malcolm's death, the FBI suspected groups other than just the Nation of Islam. One informant told FBI agents that it looked like an inside job of the MMI, that is the Muslim Mosque Incorporated. One source with confirmation from another indicated that investigators should check out Washington and the CIA because they wanted Malcolm out of the way because he snafu'd the African relations for the U.S. Later on that same page, it is interesting to note that the FBI was aware that a pack of Camel cigarettes was found in the green suit coat with the sawed-off shotgun. Muslims are not supposed to smoke. This was what was found in the effects of one of the alleged assailants of Malcolm at his assassination. So I just thought that was an interesting little bit there. And as you can see here, this is from Peter Goldman's 2013 last word, where he says something similar to what you'll hear from Baba Kondo in a few minutes, that after years of reflection, more research, as Goldman writes, it was Mr. Muhammad who gave us Malcolm X, delivered him from a life of crime, and set him off on a ministry ultimately heard and honored around the world. But it is time now to acknowledge that it was Elijah Muhammad who in the end took Malcolm from us, who made it known to his followers in language they understood that he wanted his star pupil dead, and who chafed and nagged until on February 21st, 1965, they finally got it done. It has been proven irresistibly tempting instead to blame it on some agency of the state, the CIA, FBI, and the New York City Police operating singly or in combination. And that these conspiracy theories persist in the face of an astonishing record of what Mr. Muhammad believed, said, and did during the 13 months of his sectarian war with his one-time protege. We owe much, though not all, of that record to the FBI and its invasive electronic surveillance of both men, down to wiretapping the hideaway apartment kept by the messenger in Chicago for his extramarital trysts. So again, as Amiri Baraka pointed out at one point, and others, it's worthy to note that the FBI is the source of so much of this information, and may or may not be trustworthy in all of that. But Goldman does make that point here, and well, you'll see in a moment what Baba Kondo has to say. But just a little bit here of what Goldman adds in this 2013 update. Malcolm admitted being against me, said the old man, that is Elijah Muhammad, told a caller afterwards. This is after Malcolm came to meet with him to try to get back in the good graces, was invited out to Arizona, and the wiretaps picked up some of the conversation, according to Goldman here, where Elijah Muhammad is making calls after the meeting saying basically Malcolm is the chief hypocrite. The only way to stop him is to get rid of him the way Moses and the others did their bad ones with these hypocrites. When you find them, cut their heads off. Malcolm would spend much of his last year on his 2 life-changing journeys abroad, making the Hajj to Mecca, touring Africa and the Middle East. Goldman writes here, the most notorious single entry in a long-running series was a 5-page screed under the byline Louis X, as Farrakhan was then still known. The piece cataloged Malcolm's sins and pronounced him worthy of death, adding carefully and briefly that Allah would be his executioner. In fact, the FBI files tell us that the messenger himself, not Farrakhan, was the real author. In fact, Goldman argues in this 2013 updated preface that Elijah Muhammad did most of the writing in those Muhammad Speaks papers and attributed it to Farrakhan and others, with Farrakhan happily accepting the attribution. As he says here, Goldman, to be asked to sign the article, the messenger said, was a further honor, and Farrakhan, a man with ambitions of his own, embraced it. It would be 3 decades before he finally expressed regret at having helped create the atmosphere in which Malcolm's death could be seen by the faithful as a service to Allah. This new preface is based heavily on the scholarship of the historian Paul Lee, a longtime student of the life and work of Malcolm X and of the FBI's obsessive intelligence gathering on him in the world. Baba Zach Kondo, as always, it's good to be able to catch up with you. Thank you for taking the time. I know you often get busy around this time of year, more so than normal, perhaps. But so at another time, I would like to invite you back to talk more broadly about a number of things, including some of your other work. But if we could for now, I know you're working on an update to your Conspiracies book, and I'm anxious to hear anything you could share about that, and if and then any of your other thoughts about where we are in terms of assessing Malcolm's life, assassination, and what to do going forward. But I thought I would start by inviting you to say anything you'd like to in recapping your thesis, your approach, or your argument that you look to expand again in this upcoming new edition of Conspiracies.
Okay, I appreciate that. I guess what I'm basically doing in the upcoming edition is I guess you could say I'm adding more fuel, if you will, to the fire, more substance. As I studied both, just to kind of like recap my thesis. My thesis in the original Conspiracies book, which was published in 1993, was that 3 groups, were responsible for Malcolm's assassination. The Nation of Islam, who the assassins came out of there, out of mosque number 25. The FBI, which through various counterintelligence behind the scenes was doing everything it could to create tension and friction and conflict between Malcolm and the nation. And the NYPD, which mostly is going to compromise Malcolm's security, and then they're going to do some, pretty hanky-panky type stuff in reference to getting the true, trying to investigate the murder, and then basically they're going to help frame, 2 innocent, 2 men. Maybe I should use the word innocent, but 2 men who were not at the Audubon when Malcolm was killed. So that was my original thesis in Conspiracy. Since that time, and it's now 32 years, I guess. Wow, 32 years. But since that time, what I've been doing is I've been re-looking at all 3 of these groups, and basically just kind of like adding to the pot stuff that either was not available when I was originally doing it, or re-examining stuff from a different angle, from a different lens that may have already have been there. And the short of everything, Baba, is this is such a horrible, it was a horrible story when I first did the book, the first one. In some ways, it's a worse story now in so many ways because I found, some new, more information than I had previously, particularly in relation to the nation of Islam, and it's despicable. Basically, I don't use the word assassinate much these days because what they really did, and this was true 32 years ago when I first did the book, they slaughtered Malcolm. When we use the word assassinate, that's a euphemism. That's a nicer word for something that ain't nice. That man went into that ballroom with his wife and children out front, there to support him. And they put 16 bullets in a disarmed, basically in an unarmed man. And basically just kept it moving. And what's interesting is that over the years, some of the players some were officers, some were on the periphery, but over the years, some of them have talked here and there and given us more of an understanding of the inner workings of Malcolm's, slaughter, as far as the Nation of Islam was concerned. And it's just a horrible, despicable story. And then complicating it even more is, you got people like Wesley Muhammad, who I don't know what his title is. I think he's some type of assistant, student, minister, or something. But for the last several years, he and it seems like he has a small little group helping him. I don't know. But what they do is they've been going out of their way to exonerate the nation. To basically what they've done is they've played with history and with reality and with evidence and facts. And it seems like their goal is to prove somehow that the Nation of Islam had nothing to do with Malcolm's assassination, when the evidence is overwhelming that they did. And then it's more complex, because then you go back to 1993 when Farrakhan was at their Savior's Day, the reiteration of the Nation of Islam, because I always like to make a distinction between the nation today and the nation of Elijah Muhammad, because they're not the same.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. But
could you take a quick second? Well, at some point, maybe after you finish your thought, could you take a second and summarize what differences for us?
Okay. Yeah, that's fine. But then go back to 1993, February 1993. Farrakhan is speaking at the Savior's Day of the current Nation of Islam, and for all practical purposes, he admits that the nation killed it, and that it's nobody's business, and it's nobody's business but the nation's. That how they deal with their traitors, how they deal with their hypocrites, and what business does it have to do with you? So you got Wesley Muhammad and their crew. They're forced to ignore all of that type of information, so that they can make an argument that the nation didn't kill Malcolm. And then it gets real interesting, because depending on when on some of his presentations, he then makes an even more interesting argument. He says, well, okay, members from Mosque 25, participated in his assassination, but none of them were in good standing. So when they killed Malcolm, they were not in the nation at the time, so therefore they didn't kill Malcolm. And therefore the nation didn't kill Malcolm. It's like they come up with all of these ridiculous scenarios.
So the question would be, if they were not in good standing. Well, one question would be, if they were not in good standing, then why would they have carried it out? What would have caused them to carry it out?
But see, here's the problem with that. That's contradicted by the argument, by another argument that they put up, which is that Elijah Muhammad called, he told his followers that Malcolm was not to be touched. So I mean, Baba, I understand what's going on here, and it's like we're trying to use logic, and we're trying to use reason, and we're trying to, use facts. But what Wesley Muhammad and his crew are doing right now, it defies all that. It's like Trump and them. What Trump and them do, it defies, reality. And when all else fails, they just make up shit. It's like,
well, you don't have funny.
To be confined, huh? Yeah.
No, I was just gonna say it's funny you brought all this up.
Go ahead, Baba. I can't hear you.
No, I was just going to say it's funny you brought all this up, because even before I reached out to you for this interview, there were people in my comment section saying, I know you're going to interview Baba Zach, so why don't you have Wesley Muhammad on? But the last I checked, I haven't seen Wesley Muhammad's book. I thought he was to be publishing a book about his research. So I was waiting actually to see that. And the last time I saw him being interviewed a couple or maybe two ago, he was working on that book. So are you saying he's completed that book? Or are you talking about just presentations or interviews you've seen him give?
No, right. No, I'm just talking about stuff that I've seen online here and there.
Oh, okay.
I don't try to kill myself, but periodically I'll see, and then he does a lot of those academic paper stuff, which I don't really get into that academic stuff. But it seems like it's like the same articles being published, over and over again, I guess, in different periodicals or something like that. But I don't know. I can't tell you anything about him other than the stuff that I've read online. And it's a lot of it's contradictory. Some of it is just pure make-believe. Like, I'll give you an example. There's this one, maybe about 3 years ago, he did a presentation where he said that there were two groups of assassins in the Audubon. One group were Malcolm's own people, there to assassinate him. But the other group, and I want to make sure I got the number correct, there were 31 federal agencies. And we can assume, based on what he said, they were all armed. And they were there to kill Malcolm. And it's not clear if they killed Malcolm. I think they killed Malcolm versus Malcolm's own people there to kill him. I mean, it's like, where does reality kick in all of this?
Okay, so yeah.
Go ahead, Bob.
No, I was just going to say, well, I don't want to. Let's step aside. Let's for a second leave Wesley Muhammad out of this because I haven't reviewed his argument and would like to see more about what it is. Because the point would be, I think the more important point would be that having been doing all this research for all this time, you're saying the evidence is pointing you in a certain direction. And I admit my bias has always been, I have always hoped that your continued research would reveal more of the state's involvement So I'll just sort of ask again: to what extent is the state involved in Malcolm's slaughter, as you put it, and then again, without I know we need to get the new edition when it comes out to get all the details, but why are you confident in saying that the state's role is secondary, or some other somewhere else in the ranking of Malcolm's slaughter as opposed to the Nation of Islam?
Okay, well, first off, I never use the word secondary, and I would
Right,
not
right.
I would not use that term.
Okay, thank you.
What I will say, and again, this goes back to my initial thesis in the Conspiracies book, is that the state's role was basically to use its counterintelligence to exploit challenges already existing between Malcolm and Elijah Muhammad, and Malcolm and the family of Elijah Muhammad, which is also Malcolm and the national leadership of the Nation of Islam. And what the FBI basically does is they know that there's already tension. There's jealousy, there's envy, there's all types of problems that human beings have, no matter what organization you're in. So there's nothing unique about that. The problem is that what the FBI did was they knew that they were dealing with some high stakes here. They knew, for example, that the nation had an FOI, a paramilitary apparatus. They also knew through their investigation of the nation that the paramilitary of the NOI had a history of going after members, either current members or former members, but also outsiders, who may have been critical of the nation. The FBI knows this. And what they're basically going to do is they're going to exploit the problems and the differences between Malcolm and Elijah Muhammad, knowing where it could lead, knowing that we're talking about an organization that revolves around a cult of personality, knowing that we're dealing with an organization that has pretty much deified the leader. Elijah Muhammad has been deified. They know this. And they know that there is a cadre of FOI all over the country who will kill when they feel that their leader is being threatened. And they're making it more complex. There are ministers, and there are captains, and there are lieutenants inside the Nation of Islam who will also kill if necessary for their leader. And by the way, don't listen to me on this. Go back to 1993. Farrakhan is saying this in his speeches. And what the FBI basically does is they use counterintelligence things to inflame the tension, to basically do everything they can to get the leadership teed off at Malcolm, and then to get them to unleash all that energy that the FOI has, to unleash it and direct it at Malcolm. So that's going to be the role. And then they're in the background. They're not doing this publicly. They're basically hiding their bushel, And ultimately, what ends up happening in all of this is that, as one FBI investigation found, is that basically they let nature take its course. So it's going to create basically a war between Malcolm and the leadership of the nation led by Elijah Muhammad. And this conflict is going to lead to a war. And then ultimately, it's going to lead to the slaughter at the Audubon on February 21st, 1965 at 3:10 p.m. So when I first started doing this research, this was not my goal. My goal was to find the truth, but I had a secondary goal. My secondary goal is I wanted to exonerate the nation. I wanted to find evidence that the nation ain't had nothing to do with Malcolm's assassination. That was my goal. It was political, and I don't even apologize for it. But as I continued to do my research, it became real clear that there was bloody hands. Then my goal became, well, okay, there's bloody hands inside the nation. I get that part, but that don't mean that Elijah Muhammad had anything to do with it. He loved Malcolm too much. Malcolm was his son. I couldn't imagine him doing that. So then I spent time doing my best to find the evidence that Elijah Muhammad had nothing to do with Malcolm's assassination. It didn't exist. And what I found since I did the first publication is really more evidence that he was front and center of all of that. And as Brother Paul Lee always said, the equation is actually quite simple. Nothing happened inside the Nation of Islam without Elijah Muhammad giving his say-so, if it was anything major. Period. And so the issue then becomes, okay, could a group of rogue Muslims have killed Malcolm without Elijah Muhammad's permission? A big order like that. And the short answer is hell to the no. That's not, if you understand the structure of the nation in 1964, 1965, that would not have been possible. And then all you have to do is go back and read the Muhammad Speaks, all of them, from 1964 through early 1965. And you can see firsthand through his writings, through Elijah Muhammad's writings, but also through the writings of select ministers here, a captain there, a lieutenant there, a family member there. All of this is basically, what's the word I want to use? Not showcasing, but all of these are basically fueling and giving you the fuel that you need to see that this war was basically real. So yeah, it's a horrible story. And I wish that I didn't have to spend all this time studying it. But the truth of the matter is that the Nation of Islam slaughtered Malcolm X. They were instigated by the FBI, to a much lesser degree the NYPD, because like I said, their role had more to do with the post-investigation after the slaughter. But this is a horrible story, and like most African people, I don't want to believe this. I want Malcolm to have died on the battlefield with his boots on, killed by the enemy, the white power structure of the United States government. That's a much better story. If you're going to talk about an assassination, that's a better story than to say he was killed by 5 Negroes inside the Audubon on February 21st. So there's no fun in this. It's horrible. And it's even worse because we're still talking about a mentality. Some of these people in the nation have that same mentality that killed Malcolm. And so it puts targets on the backs of people like me.
Mm.
So
if I can
this is a horrible story.
Just 2 more questions for now, if that's okay. One, I want to come back to that point about the two different nations. If you could you summarize what you meant by the nation during Elijah Muhammad's time and the nation now?
Okay, sure. Well, let's go back with a very quick and dirty. Elijah Muhammad dies in February 1975. He pretty much had ordained that his son Wallace, who he always called the most spiritual of his sons, would take over the organization, and nobody challenges that. So Elijah Muhammad dies. Wallace, also known as Warif Deen, Warif Deen Muhammad, he takes over. And Wallace had a different plan for, a different plan than his father. He wanted to take the nation toward orthodoxy, or what they called orthodoxy. So he aligned his father's nation, he aligned them with Orthodox Islam, Sunni, which was the same persuasion as Malcolm. And then he began to dismantle the culture of the nation that his father had basically created. Even went so far as to do away with the FOI. He had did an investigation himself, Wallace did. And in his investigation, he found 10 instances in which FOI killed members, killed fellow Muslims. That was his investigation. Never held accountable for it. So he ends up basically not just dismantling the FOI, he dismantles the structure of the nation. I had an opportunity to interview Warif Deen Muhammad. And one of the things that he told me is that it was very difficult trying to dismantle what his father had done. And he said something I've always found kind of interesting. He said that, keep this in mind, for decades, people would send, certain tidings, certain percentages of their income to the family, to Elijah Muhammad. So one of the things that he had to cut off was that, because people still wanted to send him money. And he said it took him more than a year or so to stop that practice. So I asked him, I said, well, about how much money would, or were they sending? And this is after he's told them, don't send no more money. Don't send money. This is a new situation here. I don't want your money. He told me they would send, on average, $10,000 a month.
Oh.
That's just to give you an understanding of the culture of the old nation of Islam. Now, ultimately what happens is Farrakhan sticks around for a while, because when Elijah Muhammad died, Farrakhan was his, basically, his national spokesperson, his chief minister, pretty much the old, title that Malcolm generally had, prior to his ousting from the nation. He stuck around for a little bit, and then when he realized that he didn't like where Wallace was going with everything, he ultimately left the Nation of Islam. And then during the next couple of years, he rebooted the nation. Some of the old guard who had left previously, some of them came back to help him reboot. Some of them didn't. Like, I've met over the years, as you could probably imagine, I've met lots of former Muslims under Elijah Muhammad who left either Wallace. And then if you tell them, if you call the current nation the Nation of Islam, they resent that. They have problems with that. They said, that's not the Nation of Islam. The Nation of Islam died basically when Elijah Muhammad died. So as I'm listening to this, I began to understand that it was a mistake on our part to not make that separation between the Nation of Islam under Elijah Muhammad and the Nation of Islam under Farrakhan. So I began to basically start to make those separations. You're talking about two different organizations with two different memberships. Even though one of them is based on the other, as far as a model is concerned, we're not talking about the same organization. Even though, yes, a few people did stick around. You can find some people who, when Elijah Muhammad was still alive, they were members and then they joined with Farrakhan. All that's true. But we're still talking, we're not talking about a continuation. We're talking about two separate entities. So that's why I make that separation.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. Okay, so Baba Zach, the question was about the work of Professor Ibram Kendi, who has written the foreword to the re-release of Malcolm X Speaks, the famous collection of Malcolm's speeches, but who was also promoting a forthcoming book on Malcolm that he says is for children, but of course also for adults, where the promotional tagline seems to be, or the reveal that he's promising is some new information on the history and the origins of Wallace Fard Muhammad, the founder of the nation, who brought in then Elijah Poole, who would become Elijah Muhammad. And of course, the reveal, as it's already been reported in CNN, is that Wallace Muhammad was a white man from New Zealand who concocted this identity as an Asiatic black man from the Middle East and tricked, the unwitting new members of this new organization. I feel like this information has been out there already, or the claim. Do you have any thoughts on that history, that claim, or the idea that this is some new reveal?
No, it's not a new reveal. What it is for what we know about Fard Muhammad is like New Zealand is one possible origin. I think there's about six. There are six possible origins of where this guy is from. Morocco is another one. I think Turkey is another one. It's like here's the problem, Baba. We don't know much about him. If you read his FBI file, the FBI throws up their hands and admits that they too don't know. All they can tell you is the different possibilities of where he's from. Now, one thing that we do know about him, though, is that he would constantly tell people that in the future, he was going to give details about who he is and where he's from and his history. That period never came. That opportunity never came. So to this very day, because in fact, you know what? I remember reading in the Final Call, I think Wesley wrote an article in which he argued that he was an Arab, and I think he took I want to say an Arab, maybe from Arabia or somewhere like that, but somewhere in the Mideast. The truth is that we don't know much about him at all. Now, this gets interesting though, because when I was interviewing Wallace, decades ago, I asked Wallace, can you tell me anything about Fard? Because remember, he's named after him.
Right.
What he said to me, and I didn't ask about, his origins and his, heritage and all that stuff. But what you might find interesting is that he told me that that Fard was in contact, that he and members of his family were in contact with Fard until he died. I think he said he died in 1976. I don't have my notes or anything based on that, but that's what I remember he basically telling me, is that, and that, of course, according to the, to the mythology, he was, taken up, and I think on the mothership and all of that, that type of stuff. But he apparently died in 1976. And Wallace told me something else too. He said that he had renounced what he did in helping to organize the original nation as well, and that he had embraced, one of the, I think it was Sunni, but one of the more orthodox forms of Islam. So that's what I remember from War of D. Muhammad.
So it is interesting to note how both Kondo and Goldman reach similar conclusions, unfortunately, and it is interesting to even to go back as you can kind of easily and see some of what was being said in those Muhammad Speaks. And here is one of the more infamous ones where Malcolm's brother Filbert says here to be exposing Malcolm as a hypocrite, and you see Malcolm's head cut off with the devil's horns. And you can see this is the one in question, featuring one written by Louis X, the future Mr. Farrakhan, a long essay outlining the hypocrisy of Malcolm. And it is in here where it is said that someone who is as much a hypocrite as this is worthy of death. The die is set, and Malcolm shall not escape, especially after the evil, foolish talk about his benefactor Elijah Muhammad and trying to rob him of the divine glory which Allah has bestowed upon him. Such a man as Malcolm is worthy of death, and would have met with it if it had not been for Muhammad's confidence in Allah for victory over the enemies. And by the way, just as I was reviewing some of these, it is interesting to review some of what still pervades the economic plan, the Black business entrepreneurial plan. Let it be known that the 3-year economic plan is for all 22 million of the so-called American Negroes for the purpose of helping self against poverty and want to curtail our wild and wasteful spending. So as I've said that, and shown that this is often the time period, or this would have been where Malcolm and others would have been getting that logic and promoting it for a time, the sort of the do for self, Black business, Black entrepreneurial solution, which, not judging the intent, but is just an unfortunately limiting and flawed approach, especially as it says here that where it's designed to be for the good of the entire community. It's just not possible. But it's just interesting to see the argument, being made from way back when. But remember, because just a quick side note again, remember, people are arguing that it's the revolution that is old and tried. We've been done that and it fails, and seem to forget the history of the failure of entrepreneurialism and Black capitalism to solve any of these problems. So, but we can revisit that another time.
Tonight, Front Page Challenge welcomes the outspoken Negro leader, Malcolm X.
Sir, what's the real reason why you two men split? Is it merely ideological, or is it personality? What else?
Probably personality. It was not the statement that originally was given by the movement when we split. It's more personality than anything else.
You've called people like Martin Luther King, who just got a Nobel Peace Prize, an Uncle Tom. Is this correct, first?
Well, I'd rather say that in the States, there's a law that has recently been passed, or a decision handed down by the court, wherein if you call someone an Uncle Tom, they can sue you for libel.
Well,
so I never refer to them as Uncle Toms. I would say that Uncle Martin is my friend,
Uncle Martin is your friend, yet you would disagree with his approach to what he wants to accomplish.
Definitely. If his approach would bring about what the black man in America needs to completely eliminate the problem that we have, I would say well and good. But I very much doubt that anyone who adopts the approach that Martin Luther King has been teaching to our people in that country can point to any meaningful gains that has actually served to solve the problem.
Black Muslims have sometimes, whether you have or not, and I think probably you have sometimes, it seemed to me, been preaching hate to meet hate.
I don't advocate any kind of hate.
But there's a lot of talk that sounds very much like it.
No, I think that the guilt complex of the American white man is so profound until when you begin to analyze the real condition of the black man in America, instead of the American white man eliminating the causes that create that condition, he tries to cover it up by accusing his accusers of teaching hate. But actually, they're just exposing him for being responsible for what exists.
Well, that's something of an argument, but I've heard speeches made by some of the people of your group. I think I've heard you make speeches. It seemed to me that you were advocating, what I would have to describe, I think, as violence to meet the serious injuries that have been done your people, with which I totally agree.
I don't call that violence. I don't in any way encourage black people to go out and initiate acts of aggression indiscriminately against whites. But I do believe that the black man in the United States and any human being, anywhere, is well within his right to do whatever is necessary, by any means necessary, to protect his life and property, especially in a country where the federal government itself has proven that it is either unable or unwilling to protect the lives and property of those human beings.
Just before Pierre takes it, you've got a pretty good fighter and the world's heavyweight champion lined up with you to help out. Yes, Pierre.
Well, Mr. X, if I guess I call you that, is that the proper appellation, yes. Mr. X? I'm wondering if you still believe, as I think you certainly did at the time you were allied to the black Muslim movement, in a segregated black nation in North America.
I don't believe in any form of segregation or any form of racism. I'm against any form of segregation and against racism.
Am I right in saying that the black Muslim movement, which you have left, did believe in that?
Well, Elijah Muhammad taught his followers that the only solution was a separate state for black people. And as long as I thought he genuinely believed that himself, I believed in him and believed in his solution. But when I began to doubt that he himself believed that that was feasible, and I saw no kind of action designed to bring it into existence or bring it about, then I turned in a different direction.
Are you still a Muslim yourself?
Oh, yes. I'm a Muslim. I believe in the religion of Islam, which believes in brotherhood, complete brotherhood of all people. But at the same time that I believe in this brotherhood, I don't believe in forcing my desire for brotherhood upon those who aren't willing to accept it.
Of course, I think the Christians would say that they also believed in brotherhood. What did you say to that?
I'd say they believe in it, but don't practice it.
That'd be a pretty good answer.
Sir, when the muezzin goes up in the minaret twice a day, he cries to the world, there is but one God, and he is Allah. Do you deny that there is a Christian God?
The muezzin does this 5 times a day.
5 times, and I only heard him twice.
Well, you were fortunate to hear him twice. But he does this 5 times a day, and the same God that he says that he expresses the existence of is the God that the Christians profess to believe in themselves, and the God that the Jews believe in. One God, the creator of the universe. The Muslims believe in the God that created the universe, and I think the Christians do, and the Jews do. Now, as long as all of them are talking about the creator, the Jews may call him Jehovah, and Christians may have another name for him. Those who are Arabic-speaking refer to him as Allah. Well, we believe in the same God.
Now, as the Muslim religion advances in the United States, are you modernizing it or sticking with the old faiths? For example, the complete segregation of the sexes.
I think that everything today on this earth is being modernized. Religious principles and practices, as well as political and other things.
Now, when you went to Mecca, this is a very sacred and forbidden city. I tried to get to Mecca myself and certainly didn't make it, not being a Muslim. But how would they accept you as one? You're an American. There are few American Muslims.
This is true, and by being an American and not having not being able to speak the Arabic language, I did strike a snag, a very serious snag, but I was fortunate to have been pretty well known by the officials in Arabia, and they knew too that I had accepted Orthodox Islam. It had been highly publicized in the paper, and I became a guest of the state. I was a guest of Prince Faisal, the present King Faisal, and they made it possible for me to go before the committee, Hajj committee or Hajj court, who examines you and asks you questions about your belief, and if you pass it, then you are okay to go to Mecca. But it's
You would
true.
have to have a translator then.
I had one. Then realizing that our problem in America, that we are black Americans, and we have a problem that goes beyond religion, we formed a group known as the Organization of Afro-American Unity. And the objective of this organization is non-religious, number one. Any Negro can belong to it. And the objective of that organization is to bring about a condition that will guarantee respect and recognition of the 22 million black Americans as human beings. We feel that the problem, number one, of the black man in America is beyond America's ability to solve. It's a human problem, not an American problem or a Negro problem. And as a human problem or a world problem, we feel that it should be taken out of the jurisdiction of the United States government and the United States courts and taken into the United Nations in the same manner that the problems of the black man in South Africa, Angola, and other parts of the world, and even the way they're trying to bring the problems of the Jews in Russia into the United Nations because of violation of human rights. We believe that our problem is one not of violation of civil rights, but a violation of human rights. Not only are we denied the right to be a citizen in the United States, we're denied the right to be a human being.
Harlem, New York City, February 21st, 1965. It is 3 p.m. In the middle of a political meeting, Malcolm X is shot 16 times. A few minutes later, he is dead. He is 39 years old. For almost a year, he has known he is at risk from his former comrades in the Nation of Islam. On this day, they silence the voice of freedom for millions of African Americans.
We declare our right on this earth to be a man, to be a human being, to be respected as a human being, to be given the rights of a human being in this society, on this earth, in this day, which we intend to bring into existence by any means necessary.
Brothers and sisters, I was not looking to get the gift myself. I only wanted you to see how righteous people, how they value wealth. They don't value gold and silver like you. They take it and build homes and even out of it. Now here is a whole mosque. Nothing but gold.
The money that came from the rank and file to the Nation of Islam, to Chicago, they were helping to spend that money on lavish living, good clothes, fancy clothes, big cars, big homes and everything. And Malcolm always talked about that and talked against that style.
When the Honorable Elijah Muhammad got sick in 1962, and everyone thought that he was going to die, the newspapers speculated at that particular point that the logical successor to the Honorable Elijah Muhammad would be Malcolm X. And at that point, the family looked and said, wait, we got too much invested. We're going to lose our cash cow. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad looked at Malcolm as his seventh son. And so they did everything they could to break that up.
A simple pretext will suffice to seal the divide. The assassination of President Kennedy, November 22nd, 1963. Elijah Muhammad forbids his disciples from commenting on Kennedy's assassination. The messenger is afraid of offending a substantial proportion of the black community who have supported the Democratic candidate. But Malcolm X pays no heed, and once again, and once too many, creates headline news.
This is it. Okay.
Now, this is the first mosque.
This is the first mosque. This
First
is the
temple back, as
right.
they used to
That's right. This became temple number 12.
Right. They started saying in the mosque at that time that, you know, Malcolm's name should never be mentioned again, and I just couldn't see that, you know. And I said, they just dropped him like a hot potato. And he did much of the work that we enjoy today, you know. I just didn't understand how they could just go completely against this man, you know, like he wasn't nothing, you know. And I said, this is not right. And I knew then it was time to leave unless somebody could really explain to me what's going on.
They're afraid that I will tell the real reason that that I'm out of the black Muslim movement, which I never told. I kept to myself. But the real reason is that Elijah Muhammad, the head of the movement, is the father of 8 children by 6 different teenage girls, 6 different teenage girls who were his private personal secretary.
The truth is that Malcolm knew about those girls. The girls had nothing to do with Malcolm's splitting. I knew about those girls. There was rumors of the story as early as 1958. And one of those girls, at least 2 of those girls, were Malcolm's ex-girlfriend. Certainly Evelyn was Malcolm's ex-girlfriend. She was his fiancée. So Malcolm knew about those stories, and he knew about the girls. But the reason that the girls became an issue is because Malcolm needed something to latch on to.
Elijah Muhammad's entourage is outraged and embarrassed by the scandal. Their strategy is now clear. Malcolm X has to be silenced. Malcolm X is now a wanted man. In August '64, 7 months before his death, during a visit to Cairo for an OAU summit meeting, he's the victim of an attempted murder.
His life is in danger. He's seeking allies. He's trying to stay alive. People are trying to kill him. He's poisoned in Cairo, sitting at the table of Abdel Nasser, for God's sake.
People say to create a division between African Americans and Islamic countries, right? They never could find a waiter who brought him this food, you know. And later account was that he had poison in him to kill 10 men. He survived it, but he was definitely weakened.
Whoever may have been behind this bizarre murder attempt is still a mystery. It is hard to imagine that the Nation of Islam could have set up such an operation so far from home. But who else wanted Malcolm X dead? 6 months later, another disturbing event occurs during a trip to Paris. February 9th, 1965. As Malcolm X steps off the plane, he is refused entry into France. Were the French subjected to external pressures? Were they informed of an impending attack and hoped to avoid it taking place in Paris? Or did the prefect of police, Maurice Papon, simply frown upon the arrival of an African-American agitator? In any case, the event raises a great deal of controversy and continues to fuel no end of conjecture concerning Malcolm X's assassination.
When he came back to the United States, several of us met him at the airport, at Kennedy Airport. And in riding back to the city with him in the car, he said something very strange. He said, you know, I've come to realize that I made a mistake. I found recently that my troubles are not from Chicago. And so we said to him, well, where are these problems coming from? And he pointed down south. He said, from Washington.
I saw him for the last time. I was in near tears. You know. And he told me to leave the country because you didn't know who you could trust. You know, he was tremendously emotionally impacted by the government's plan to destroy our leaders.
A plan to destroy black leaders? Since the split with the Nation of Islam, Malcolm X makes numerous declarations and gestures suggesting a more open attitude towards other political forces. In so doing, he moves closer to his former sworn enemy, Martin Luther King.
The coming together of Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X created nightmares for the FBI. J. Edgar Hoover in 1965 or 6 wrote an infamous internal memo called the Black Messiah. Hoover says, above all else, we must stop the rise of a single black messiah who can unite all black people in the United States.
Selma, Alabama, February 1965, 3 weeks before the assassination. Martin Luther King is campaigning in a state still very much prey to racial segregation.
Well, our campaign here in Selma is to do a very simple yet important thing, namely to get Negroes the right to vote.
I order you to disperse, otherwise you're under arrest for
All
contempt
right.
of court.
Shall we stand in prayer until the time is given for us to
Order you
disperse
disperse.
by this sheriff breaking Judge Thomas's order?
The operation is transformed into a riot. The Reverend himself is arrested. Once again, Malcolm X makes the news. He arrives in Selma, Alabama, to support Dr. King.
Malcolm goes to Coretta Scott King and he says, I am not here to foment discontent. I'm here to provide support for your husband. I respect Dr. King, and I want you to understand that my role is to be the left wing in this movement, to frighten white America so that they negotiate with Dr. King.
And he and Dr. King had a 2-hour interview over the phone. And I do know that Dr. King sent his lawyer to Malcolm's meetings on taking the United States before the UN for the charge of genocide against African Americans.
Accusing the USA of genocide in the midst of the Cold War would be a catastrophe for the image of the American government. But Malcolm X is determined to see it through. Thanks to his relations with various African governments, the radical leader organizes a second diplomatic front.
And let me tell you what I think that really sealed his doom. The United States, Belgium, I think England, I don't know whether France was involved, but there was this big thing going on in the Congo. And they sent troops into the Congo ostensibly to protect some white nuns who, of course, were being threatened by these African savages, as they always like to say. 2 African UN diplomats, because of the groundwork laid by Brother Malcolm at the OAU meeting, said if the United States has the right to invade into the Congo to save these white nuns, then who's to say that we don't have the right to militarily assist the African Americans in Mississippi who are being killed?
Now listen, that's called my boy. You know nothing about that.
Hope you are continuing to enjoy these weekly looks at 100 Years of Malcolm, which will culminate on May 19th, his 100th birthday. Just wanted to look a little bit again at some of the backs and forth and update some of the previous research being done, in this case, a little bit by Goldman, and reviewing his 2013 updated preface, and hearing from Baba Zak Kondo on where it looks like his forthcoming update is headed, and we can't wait to see that as well. It's also interesting to note how that clip there in that documentary ends with Peter Bailey talking about the relationship of Malcolm's assassination to what was going on in the Congo. Please do go back and watch on Patreon our review crew debate over Soundtrack to a Coup d'etat, which is, of course, about Patrice Lumumba's assassination, and the features Malcolm X in some clips, and also where we can be reminded of the Pan-Africanism in all of this, the soda in all of this, despite where some of us may disagree on the quality of that documentary. The goal I do think the documentary does a good job of showing that the goal of Western powers, the United States in particular, was to prevent African unity, SOTA, Pan-Africanism. They feared Lumumba's role in all of that, Malcolm's relationship to it as well. So please revisit all of that. Please also revisit her boy Don Rojas discussion on Malcolm and the CIA, which adds their views to the role and involvement of the state in Malcolm's assassination, surveillance, concerns about the growth of his efforts. And as I just reposted on my channel, the classic discussion we had, part one of the classic discussions we had with Dr. Yvonne Sion, who, among other things, is the mother of Dave Chappelle, but as someone involved in Black studies for a long time, talked with us about her time going to the Congo and trying to extend the work of Patrice Lumumba just after his assassination. So it's a fascinating discussion. So check that out as well, and adds just a little bit more to this. And then lastly, it was incomplete. I never really got too far, but I will share that I had started a little unofficial investigation into the way Malcolm was being discussed and represented in mainstream media over the last 30 days with a little ProQuest search. And of the roughly 375 hits that I got, it pretty much confirmed what I've been arguing and why I think this series is so important and the work we're doing here is so important. Malcolm's name comes up a lot in mainstream commercial media and came up a lot. Again, 375. And it was really more than that, but it was with a little bit of adjusting the search, whatever. But the point is, hundreds and hundreds of references. None that I saw, and I didn't get that far, just to confirm that this is unofficial and incomplete. But it was still very clear that they're not talking about his politics, his ideas. They're doing quick summaries, base summaries of his life, his involvement in the nation, and his death. No encouragement that people engage the work that he was doing, and that's one of the gimmicks of empire these days. So there's still much more to do. Please enjoy the rest of your Monday and have a good week. Peace, only if you're willing to fight for it, as Fred Hampton used to say, and I'll see you next time right here at...
And what did you sacrifice? Calm. Kindness, kinship. Love. I've given up all chance at inner peace. I made my mind a sunless space. I share my dreams with ghosts. I wake up every day to an equation I wrote 15 years ago for which there's only one conclusion. I'm damned for what I do. My anger, my ego, my unwillingness to yield, my eagerness to fight, that set me on a path from which there's no escape. I yearn to be a savior against injustice without contemplating the cost, and by the time I look down, there's no longer any ground beneath my feet. What is my sacrifice? I'm condemned to use the tools of my enemy to defeat them. I burn my decency for someone else's future. I burn my life to make a sunrise that I know I'll never see. Now, the ego that started this fight will never have a mirror or an audience or the light of gratitude. So what do I sacrifice? Everything, 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 everything.
I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.